Good afternoon and welcome. This is Melissa McVie from the OARC team. We're thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you for taking the time to participate in today's live webinar. We'll be spending the next hour with our special guests, Amber Capotosto, Certified Nutrition Manager, and Dale Mayerson, Registered Dietitian. And we'll be digging into the exciting topic of long-term care food service foundations. Before we get started, you'll notice that we've muted our microphones in an effort to eliminate background noise and distractions. And we have protected time for a dedicated question and answer period at the end of today's webinar, at which time we'll invite you to type your questions into the chat box or the question box on your toolbar. Lastly, I wanted to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded for education purposes and will be made available to all participants following the session. The webinar will also be archived on the OARC website, and you can access the slide deck for today's webinar in the materials section of your toolbar. Our speakers will be touching on this shortly, but I did want to remind our audience that today is part one of a food service webinar series. So there might be several topics that we don't cover today that will be the focus of our October webinar. And we've received, with your registrations, we received a number of excellent questions pertaining to menu review and menu planning, details about the raw food budget, for example, and these topics will be carried over to our next session, next month. I also wanted to acknowledge that we have a wonderful mix of participants tuning in for this webinar, including lots of residents, dietary and nutrition managers, and other members of the long-term care leadership teams. Our goal today is really to start to empower residents through some foundational knowledge about food services. So we've enlisted the help of some experts. Without further ado, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Amber and Dale. Thank you so much for being here. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So next slide, please. I'm just going to take myself off the, there we go. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is part of a series, and we'll be looking at and kind of giving you an insider's view of the dietary department, the different operations within the dietary department, different aspects of our food and nutrition services, and explain about the law and how we stay in line with the law. We also want to talk a little bit about the education requirements for all staff who work in dietary and share some ways that residents and resident council might be more involved in the operation that goes on within the food services department. Next, please. So we're starting with the Ontario Long-Term Care Homes Act. And the Act is the law. The regulations are kind of an explanation of the Act. So we have the Act and we have the regulations. The Act for dietary says that there has to be an organized program of nutrition care and dietary services for the home to meet the daily nutrition needs of the residents, and separately and equally important, an organized program of hydration, so drinking rather than food, for the home to meet the hydration needs of residents. And we found that hydration is extremely important for resident health, for everybody's health, and we want, and the law separates them out so that they're equally important and separate. The law also says that each home ensures that residents are provided with food and fluids that are safe, adequate in quantity, so enough to eat, nutritious with all the vitamins and minerals and protein and everything that's needed, and varied so that the menu is interesting and the same foods aren't served all the time. The word safe means that the food is from a reputable supplier, the food is clean, the food is served at the correct temperature. Okay, next please. So the slide talked about an organized program. This is what is included in an organized program. Goals and objectives that staff know and follow. And that's really important. Everybody in the department and everybody in the home should have the same goals and the same objectives to serve the residents. policies and procedures that staff know and follow. And again, very important, everybody's following the same policies. Recipes that are trustworthy, that are tasty and nutritious. Written instructions of how much of each food item to prepare. And this can get a little complicated because we have to think about every diet and every texture going to every dining room. So in one of the homes, for example, where I worked, there were 10 dining rooms. And we had to get the number correct for every diet and every texture for every dining room. We have to have a staff schedule that meets the needs of the residents so that meals are served on time, snacks are served on time, things are done correctly. Staff who are trained to do their work without continuous supervision, because in long-term care, like almost every other workplace, there's no time for a supervisor to spend their day looking over staff's shoulders. What are you doing now and what will you be doing in 5 minutes? Staff have to really work independently and know what they're doing. And then last but absolutely not least is quality assurance, quality improvement, audits to check that we are doing what we say we're doing, that, you know, that equipment is working, that food is the way it's supposed to be, that the menu is being followed, that the kitchen is clean, operating properly, and also surveys to ask other people, to ask the residents, how do you like your meal? Was your hot food hot? Did you have enough to eat? So together, the audits and the surveys make the quality improvement program, and anything that is found to be not good enough has to have an action plan to bring it up to the level that it's supposed to be. Okay, next, please. So there are 4 main activities of the dietary department, and again, I'm taking this straight out of the regulations. Menu planning, because the menu runs the show, as you'll see in a minute. Food production, food production to produce the food enough and varied and clean, as we said before. Serve the food through dining and snack service, and then have the availability of supplies and equipment to do the work that needs to be done to present the food the way it needs to be presented. Next slide, please. So the basic functions of the dietary department, this just fleshes out the previous slide a little bit more. Since residents are mostly unfamiliar with what goes on in the dietary department, we just wanted to go through the basic functions and how the department operates. So certainly planning the menu is the basic function of the department. The menu runs the show. The menu focuses on what we need to purchase. We purchase, we receive, we store the food items that we have to have on hand for the menu. We also have non-food items, cleaning supplies, paper supplies like napkins. Certainly we've used zillions of paper supplies over the time of COVID. We have to produce those menu items, chop the vegetables, wash everything, make sure everything is cooked properly, produce the correct amount, check that it's the right temperature, on time, safely. Serve the meals and the snacks on time. Again, correct diet, correct texture. Clean and sanitize after every meal and snack. Make sure everything is ready to go for the next, our next deadline. I always joke we have 3 deadlines a day we have to meet. We have to manage the cost of both the food and the non-food items within a budget. And then there's, I think, what might be an invisible piece to the residents is the clinical aspect of the dietary department, where every resident is assessed for their nutritional status 4 times a year. And that includes their monthly weight, a health check, their swallowing, lab reports, blood work, office visits, medical treatments, so many different things to look at. And we do that with each resident 4 times a year. And that is also not including the annual care conference that takes place for every resident. Every resident has a care conference 6 weeks after they move in, and then annually thereafter. And then again, as part of the basic functioning of the department, we have those quality assurance audits and surveys. So together they encompass all the work that the dietary department does on a regular basis. Next slide, please. So another regulation is very clear that we have policies and procedures, and that the policies and procedures relating to nutrition care and dietary services and hydration is done in consultation with a registered dietitian who is a member of the staff. And we look for the identification of any risks related to nutrition care and dietary services and hydration. and then also implementation of intervention. So a way to avoid those risks becoming a problem within the home, and a system to monitor and evaluate on a regular basis to make sure that the residents are getting what they need, that things are happening the way they are supposed to, and that those risks are mitigated during the time of our, as we do our work. Next slide, please. The other piece of our program is the weight monitoring system. And again, this is wording straight out of the regulations, that every resident is weighed on admission and at least monthly thereafter. And some residents who might be at nutrition risk might be weighed on a weekly basis. Depends on the situation. Every situation is different. And that any weight changes from month to month are assessed using an interdisciplinary approach, which means that nursing, dietary, physio programs, all of the departments work together to come up with ways to make sure that weight changes that action is taken for those weight changes and that the outcomes are evaluated. So for example, if somebody loses weight and they're put on, let's say, a nutritional supplement, and that's just one example, there's many things, you have to make sure that that supplement is doing its job. So we don't just put a person on a supplement and then walk away and never check. So that's what that means, that actions are taken and outcomes are evaluated. Okay, our next slide is a poll.
Okay, thank you, Dale. So we can just read this question to you. You'll see the poll up right now. And the question is, based on the information provided so far, do you have a better understanding on what a dietary department does in long-term care? Please select one.
Hi, Amber, it's Melissa here. I'm just going to give everyone a few extra seconds to get their votes in. We've got about half of our audience has logged a vote. For those of you who might be experiencing challenges getting a vote registered, I understand that you've got to go to the window view for the poll and click back and then enter your poll answer. So hopefully that helps you. I think we'll just give it one more moment and then I'll launch our findings here.
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you very much for answering the poll, and we're happy to hear that that most of the group is understanding everything so far. And remember, the presentation is attached as an attachment for everybody to follow as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so members of our dietary teams. So this slide outlines each position for many dietary teams. Each position has its own requirements and education to be eligible for hiring. The names of the positions may vary from place to place. So I would like to pass it back to Dale for the next slide, please.
Okay, so again, regulation 74, this is about the registered dietitian. And it just specifies clearly that the dietitian has to be at the home, and the dietitian is a member of the staff of the home. And the dietitian is supposed to work 30 minutes per resident per month to carry out clinical and nutrition care duties. And again, this doesn't include attending any meetings. And it's not that each resident is entitled to 30 minutes and not 31. It's the dietitian's responsibility to put the time in where the time is needed. So some residents may require a great deal of time if they're on a, if they're on a tube feeding or they have, they're at high nutrition risk. Whereas some residents are stable, their weight hasn't changed, their health hasn't changed, they're doing really well. And so they would not need 30 minutes. Just want to explain that. it's up to the dietitian to work out their timing depending on the individual resident. But it does show you that a 128 bed resident would have 2 days per week of nutrition time, of dietitian time, sorry, and a 200 bed home would have 3 days per week of dietitian time. And I also just wanted to let you know, dietitians attend 4 years of university and a 1-year internship in a healthcare facility and must be registered with the College of Dietitians of Ontario. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Dale. And our next slide is the regulations for dietary managers, and also known as nutrition managers. And this is our regulation that we must follow. And I just want to mention the subsection there, number 2. A person hired as a nutrition manager must be a member of the Canadian Society of Nutrition Management or a registered dietitian. So dietary and nutrition managers are trained, and they are trained by successfully completing an accredited college program in food and nutrition management. And that is by standard a 2-year program, and it does have a practicum, a placement requirement that is anywhere from 5 to 12 weeks. Next slide, please. And our next slide shows the regulation equation for food and nutrition managers, and that is the minimum hours a food and nutrition manager must be on site in our home. So you will see the example there. A 128 bed home has 41 hours per week, so that equals 1 full-time nutrition manager on site. So the size of the home ultimately determines how many hours and how many nutrition managers that are needed to function in that home. This does not include, though, any extra time spent on the home's activities, such as work done on Meals on Wheels, preparation for special functions, such as catering. It is only meant for the long-term care needs. Next slide, please. So we wanted to mention about our cooks and our cooks legislation. Now, our cooks have a minimum standard here of 35 hours a week, and we must have at least 1 cook at each home. Most long-term care cooks have formal training, so they have work experience. So they might have attended a college culinary management program, or they've done an apprenticeship where it gives them the skills and the knowledge. The dietary department manager, though, can schedule staff as they see fit and work it out so all the responsibilities are covered. The ministry does not tell homes how to schedule, just covers the minimum hours worked as per that legislation. So next slide is a polling question. And I'll just read out our polling question here. So according to the law, Ontario legislation, a person who is hired as a nutrition manager must be a member of the Canadian Society of Nutrition Management or a registered dietitian. Please take a moment and answer.
Hi, Amber, it's Melissa. It looks like our audience has been listening very attentively to your presentation so far. We'll just give everyone another few seconds to lock in their responses. We're about, got about 62% of our audience that have responded so far.
Wonderful, thank you. Fantastic. So it is true. So we must be a member of the Canadian Society of Nutrition Management and or a dietitian. So that is correct. Thank you, everyone. So the next slide, please. And we're discussing here about our food service workers, which is legislated in Ontario that all long-term care homes have food service workers. And these 4 points included, letters A, B, C, and D, cover all the functions for meal preparation and meal service in long-term care. Next slide, please. So our hours for food service workers. So this is our minimum standard of hours for food service workers within our long-term care homes. So an example there, the 128-bed home requires 403 hours spread over 7 days. So it's, again, our minimum standard of hours for food service workers. Now, food service workers this does not cover any extra functions such as our caterings, or if we're in a long-term care home that is attached to a retirement home, it doesn't cover the retirement side, and it doesn't cover any staff cafeterias or cafeterias open to the public. Next slide, please. And this slide is an overview of the education requirements for food service workers. So our food service workers have the requirement to attend a food service worker program that is a certificate program. And the standard is that food service workers would go to a college and obtain that food service worker certificate. And they can obtain it normally within 2 years, and that's part-time. They can obtain it while they're working, and also they can also, if they started as a cook, or say a nutrition manager decided to apply for a food service worker position, that cook or nutrition manager can opt into the food service worker position, and they do not have to obtain the food service worker certificate, because it is assumed that they have their former training being a cook or nutrition manager. So I would like to welcome back Dale for the next slide on best practices when hiring.
Thank you. So best practices are not law. We've worked our way through the basic laws within the dietary section of the regulations, but best practices are also, of course, very important, and these are some of the things we need to follow. So we're looking at best practices when hiring. Of course, we want to hire people as qualified as possible for these positions, for the food service worker, the dietary aide, and the cooks. And we check references carefully, and I'm sure that a lot of you can understand what it's like to hire somebody based on a 1-hour conversation and then hope that we've hired the best person possible. But we do check references. We do a thorough orientation and training for all staff. We make sure staff are familiar with the policies and they understand them. We do ongoing training as well. Like I said earlier, staff are trained to work independently, so it's really important that somebody who comes in after a short period of training is able to do the job fully. Excuse me. Make sure staff, for their own sakes, know how to handle equipment properly, know how to handle chemicals, know how to operate all of the machines, and work safely for themselves and their co-workers and the residents. We also make sure that all tasks are assigned to someone so that all the work gets done. This is just basic within every department of long-term care. Okay, next slide, please. To ensure food quality, we have regular communication at all levels to catch problems, to fix problems. For example, the dietitian might be working part-time and want to do a really thorough investigation on residents' who are at nutrition risk. And we know that we have to go to the PSWs because they know the residents better than anybody. Certainly the nutrition manager and dietitian work together. The dietitian works with the nurses, with all of the departments together. That's working together makes things better for everybody. And an example here is a resident needs a different diet or a different texture. So the nutrition manager can make the change as soon as the dietitian asks for it and can inform the dietary aides. It shouldn't take 2 days. It should be the next meal, if at all possible, so that changes are made and residents stay safe. It's very important, for example, if a resident is choking or coughing when taking a regular diet, and we can provide minced food or softer food to help the resident manage eating better and more independently and able to eat more. Those audits, I'm a big quality assurance believer. So I put audits in here a lot, but I want those audits completed every week or every month with a follow-up action plan to make sure that things are going well. And a perfectly good example here is a refrigerator that might not be keeping the correct temperature. If we see that the temperature is too high, we can call somebody in right away to fix it. We don't have to wait until the fridge breaks down, where we have to move things around, change the menu. It causes quite a commotion and it's more expensive. So we do try to keep track of equipment and make sure that everything is working properly. We do complete those surveys. Again, how was your meal? Were you happy with the service? There's so many questions that we can ask. And there's also an annual satisfaction survey, and that is part of the Long-Term Care Homes Act, that every home in Ontario should have an annual satisfaction survey. And that includes asking residents about their meal experience. Next, please. Observation in the dining room. I always think it's amazing that if the nurse is in the dining room, the PSW is in the dining room, the dietitian is in the dining room, and the nutrition manager is in the dining room, they will all see something different going on during the meal service. And I just pulled out a few examples, and there are hundreds more. But for example, one of the things that I would notice is whether or not a resident is seated correctly for swallowing. Resident could be leaning forward, tilted backwards too far, and that would put swallowing at risk. A resident might be able to eat independently or more independently if they have a special cup or a special spoon or a special other utensil, special plate, for example, because we really want to promote independence. It's much nicer for somebody to be able to feed themselves than to have to wait for someone to come and assist them. Although we're happy to assist everybody and whatever's needed, but we do want to promote that independence. Picking up dirty soup bowls, for example, on the table before the main course is served, just to have the table as neat and nice as possible. Another example is a resident who's coughing during the meal and might benefit from a different textures, as I mentioned earlier. So lots of things to see in the dining room. It's so important for supervision in the dining room and observation in the dining room to pick up these things and make changes so that everybody is doing as best as they can. And that communication among all staff really helps to identify problems, fix problems, and really contributes to better food intake, more independent intake at meals and at snacks. Next slide, please. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, every resident has a nutritional assessment at least 4 times a year. And I have a feeling that this is invisible work to a lot of residents. They don't see this happening, but it does take up a consistent chunk of time and effort to make sure that this is done appropriately. So we take a look at what people are eating and drinking, how they are chewing and swallowing, how much they're eating, how much is left over on their plates for meals and snacks. We follow weight changes, we follow blood work, health changes. Again, medical appointments, there's so many different things that we could look at within the resident's chart, and that is done at least 4 times a year. We try to classify residents at nutrition risk right away so that we can look after them and make sure that there's the least amount of problems that can happen. A resident who might be losing weight, we might give them a special snack or a supplement, and we monitor those results. We also, as a best practice, try not to restrict the diet unless it's truly necessary. So somebody who has diabetes and their blood glucose levels are stable, everything's under control, they should be able to have a regular diet with no restrictions. And I know that there are some concerns. Certainly some family members might disagree. My mother needs, a very rigid diet because this is what she's always followed. But, when somebody is is in long-term care, we really want to encourage them to eat. And we've found over research that the more restrictions there are in the diet, the less the person eats. So the more opportunity there is to have a variety of foods and different foods, they eat better, and ultimately that's better for their health. So again, somebody with blood sugar not under control, it's a completely different story. And we will provide special diets as much as necessary, but we don't want to restrict unless it is necessary. Again, an assistive device, a special cup or a plate that allows independence with eating is really wonderful. The other thing to mention just about resident health is constipation, because I know as a dietitian for many years that constipation is a big problem within long-term care. And so we do try to put fiber into the diet for everybody, but also add additional foods and snacks high in fiber, just to reduce the amount of medication taken for constipation. They may have alternate side effects or might, not be as pleasant for the resident. I'd much rather treat constipation with food instead of medication, or with food along with medication. Next, please. Okay, the role of the dietary team within the resident care programs. We again want everybody to participate together. Departments work together, departments work with each other and contribute to the health and well-being of the residents. And that's across the board, from the administrator all the way down to all the staff. The biggest issues that we're concerned about within long-term care, first is falls. Residents who fall, unfortunately, sometimes break their hip, and their quality of life is very different after that once they're not walking around anymore and they're in a wheelchair or lying in bed. We want to avoid that as much as possible. Dietary plays a role there in keeping people healthy, giving them enough to drink so that they're not dizzy and dehydrated and falling down, giving them enough protein to keep their bones and muscles in good condition. Skin and wound care is another issue across the board in long-term care. We want to promote skin integrity. We want the skin to stay complete and whole, without any holes, without any breakdown, without any problems. We want to prevent wounds and pressure ulcers. This happens more for people who are not eating well, who are lying in bed, who are confined to a wheelchair, don't move around a lot, not a great blood flow, and skin starts to break down. And if there are open wounds, they can become infected. So much easier to prevent wounds than it is to treat wounds after the fact. So again, eating protein, certain vitamins and minerals, drinking well, all of those are important to keep your skin healthy. Continence and bowel program. Of course, we want to keep residents clean. We want to keep residents dry and comfortable. Dietary can help with that with a higher fiber diet. We also really promote fluid intake, as you can see across these slides throughout the legislation. Hydration is very important. Some residents who are wearing incontinence products are embarrassed, maybe. And in my own practice, I've seen that residents may refuse to drink. That's absolutely not good. We need to keep drinking to stay healthy. And so offering fluids, we offer fluids with every meal. We offer fluids with every snack. And the nurses offer fluids with every medication. So at least 9 times a day, we're providing drinks. And we hope that keeps people hydrated and comfortable. Pain management is always an issue in long-term care. Arthritis, lots of things that we can't fix, and all we can do is give medication to make residents comfortable. But we also want them to be comfortable during meals. The less pain they have, the more residents will eat. Right? If you're in pain, you really aren't going to be happy eating. If you can't hold your fork because of arthritis in your fingers, then there's a risk of not eating enough. So these 4 things are really highlighted throughout long-term care as being a focus to make sure that residents stay safe. Next slide, please. Okay, empowering residents with some working knowledge of the legislation. We really want to establish and build trust and relationship with the residents. I've had residents say to me where they think the truck pulls up and we just take the food off the truck and serve it to the residents. Like it's just magic, They don't know that there's a whole kitchen downstairs filled with equipment and people working hard to provide the nicest meal possible. And it works both ways. The cooks are making the food and never see who it gets served to. And the people are eating the food and never see who makes it. So, you know, we think that being connected and informed and involved is going to make a difference for everybody. So some of the things that we would ask residents is to participate in resident council meetings, get involved in a food committee in the home if possible. You know, speak up about what's on your mind about food. You don't have to think of yourself as complaining if you're just providing information about a meal to the nutrition manager or the dietary aide. You know, I've also given residents kitchen tours many times. I think that they love to see all that stainless steel, the great big soup kettles, you know, the fancy ovens and the steamers and all the different kitchen equipment that we have. Encouraged communication with the cooks and kitchen staff during audits, and we've even sent the cook upstairs to meet the residents during the meal so that the cook gets direct feedback about the meal that they just prepared. Including a dietary column in your monthly newsletter would be helpful, and that's something else that I've written before. And the one that I remember the best was when I wrote down how many loaves of bread we use in a week and how many, you know, liters of milk we use and how many pounds of meat we use. And, you know, it was interesting to people. They didn't think about the vast quantity of food. You know, when we get a delivery, and it's usually twice a week, it can be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 worth of food items. It's not like it's, you know, one small bag, right? So it takes time to put away, organized, you know, buy the right things, get the right amount, keep things clean, put things away. It's all information that we would want to share with residents to get them informed about how the dietary departments are. We also are happy to get, you know, you can think about comment cards, suggestion boxes, meeting in person, having a food only residents council meeting to just talk about the food and invite the nutrition manager and maybe the cook to hear what the comments are and the discussion is. We find that really useful and valuable to bring people together. And I think that people, like, you know, we all want to be heard. So it's something that that can be added maybe to the practices that you have right now in your home. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just as a recap, we've run through this. I hope I didn't speak too quickly through all of these slides, but we want to just let you know staff are at work to support the residents' health and meet their wants and needs. It's a very rewarding job to, you know, for people to look after people, and it's something that we're, you know, happy to do every day. The meetings and committees that take place in the home allow for continual communication. They're an opportunity to make improvements. And again, speaking up, speak to the staff in the dining room. You can speak to the nutrition manager. You can speak to the administrator. You can speak to the corporate office, board of directors. You know, we want to please you as much as we can. We can't do everything, but we can do something. I mean, I know myself, in my family of 4, I can bring dinner to the table and not everybody's happy. We know that we're not going to make 100% of residents happy with 100% of our meals, but it shouldn't stop us from trying. You know, we want to please people as much as possible. And our overarching goal here is for staff to provide the best quality of life, the best service to residents that we can provide. And we follow the legislation and we follow the best practices, and we're happy for new best practices as well. As they come up, like the, you know, this liberalization of the diet is fairly new within all of these practices. But we found that it makes a big difference to serve everybody, every kind of variety, and people are happier with more choice. Okay, next slide, please. So we also just want to remind you, we're doing another webinar, Amber and I, on October 13th about food purchasing and production and menu planning. We have a lot to share with you, and we hope that you will take part in that webinar on October 13th. Next slide, please. Okay, we are welcome to answer any questions or discussion that you might have. I think that I'm hoping you've been typing into the question box, and Melissa, do you have any questions for us?
Perhaps we could start with maybe one of the questions that came in with our registrations. We will give everyone a few minutes to start populating our question box on your toolbar. If there are questions, maybe some points of clarification based on all the great information provided by Amber and Dale, we invite you now to submit questions.
So Melissa, one of the questions can I go to the sheet that you provided with questions?
Sure, and then I've got a couple coming into the chat box. So why don't you go ahead with one, and then we'll go back to our list here.
Okay, so the first question here that I have is discuss the liberalized diet versus sugar levels and weight gain. And because now you know that we do track weight gain, we can do several things. We have many opportunities to do different things to make sure that residents don't continue to gain weight if that's an unhealthy outcome for them. You know, we have residents who move in and they're just so delighted to have 3 meals put in front of them, and they didn't have to cook any, you know, they didn't have to prepare. And some residents who have been looking after themselves very well at home, and, you know, weight can fluctuate up or down depending on the situation with the resident after they move in. But certainly if we see sugar levels, like blood sugar levels increasing, if we see weight gain happening, then we can cut back. We can offer the same variety but smaller portions. For example, we can offer the same food, but, you know, change the desserts a little bit to a healthier option instead of, you know, cake or pudding, although I like pudding because it gets milk into people. But there are certain things that we can do. So we don't just put everybody on the same diet, walk away and don't pay attention to what happens. So I just wanted to reassure you of that.
Thanks, Dale. So we now have a few questions popping up here. There is interest in learning more about the quality improvement audits and surveys that you referenced earlier. Who's enforcing them, and what are the consequences? So I think this, in this case, it might be the inspection protocols that the dietary team follows that are in line with the administrative.
The home should have a quality assurance committee or some kind of best practices committee. You know, the title of the committee changes with homes, but they should all have audits that they're doing. And those audits should be updated when things change. For example, we had a cleaning audit and we noticed everything was getting cleaned the way it was supposed to except the microwave. And somehow we missed the microwave on the audit. And once the microwave was added, then everything got clean. So we do follow the inspectors, the inspections that the ministry inspectors do when they come in, but we have our own internal audits as well. And those are widely shared by nutrition managers and part of what nutrition managers learn in school. So we have many tools that we can use to check that we're doing the right thing. And it is mandatory through the administrator or the CEO to make sure that those audits are completed and followed up.
So if a home is found non-compliant with some of those IPs, what would be perhaps a consequence?
Well, there is a voluntary plan of action that can go into place. I don't have all of the right words. I'm sorry. There's voluntary plan to make sure they're done. Sometimes there are bigger consequences if the home has been breaking those rules for a long period of time. Then there are consequences. We've all seen where the ministry has taken over certain homes when things are really, really bad. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. We want to do well. We want to do the right thing. So maybe it's just a matter that somebody wasn't informed about what to do, or they don't have the education or knowledge or background of what to do. You know, and we correct those as we go.
Thanks, Dale. There's another question on a related note. One of the questions on the inspection protocols asks if the home has food consumption monitoring system. Is this different than an organized nutrition program?
It's part of the organized nutrition program, but the PSW documents after every meal and every snack how much the resident ate and drank. So that is certainly a part of it. So it is monitored and it is documented, and the documentation is checked by the dietitian when the dietitian does their continued work. Amber, do you have anything you want to add to this?
No, that is correct, Dale. They will check, and it is part of our program and our due diligence to double check. So.
Yeah, nobody's eating without somebody noticing what they're eating or how much they're eating. You know, and that also goes along with the weight. weight loss and weight gain. I mean, there's a whole story that comes together, a whole picture that comes together from all of these different pieces of information about how the resident is doing.
Thank you. Another question comes from Crystal. Oral care is notoriously poor in long-term care. How would the dietary team get involved or contribute to good oral care?
Okay, this is a little out of my wheelhouse, but oral care is done by the PSWs. We provide the food. We make sure that residents have enough to eat and are eating well and have variety. The nursing care, I believe, looks after oral care. So, you know, that means taking out dentures, washing them, cleaning them, brushing teeth, helping residents to brush, floss, to call a dentist when needed, to bring a dentist into the home, to provide services if possible, or get the resident out to a dentist. It's a little bit beyond what the nutrition department, like what the dietary department does, but it's all one of the same. Residents aren't going to eat well if their teeth hurt, you know, and they're not going to eat the same variety if the food, you know, needs to be minced, or, you know, there's just a different vibe to minced and pureed food. So we want residents to have the healthiest mouths possible, to be able to eat the widest variety of foods, enjoy salads and, you know, lettuce on their sandwiches and those kinds of things. So again, it's the whole home's responsibility to make sure the resident is safe, but the dietary department is not really providing oral care.
Thanks, Dale. We've had a few people ask about sharing the presentation slides, and I know one home was projecting the presentation on a smaller television set, so they found the slides harder to read. So just a reminder that the slide deck is available to you right now under the handout section of your toolbar. And we will also endeavor to send out the PDF version of the slide deck that you can subsequently print and distribute to residents and team members after today's session.
And Melissa, I'm happy to continue answering questions, but if you could just go to the next slide, please.
Oh, certainly.
So Amber and I are both listed here with our emails if you want to get in touch with us, if you want the, you know, the PowerPoint presentation instead of the PDF, or you have other questions, or, you know, you want to talk about this more, something has triggered an interest, please get in touch with either one of us. And we're really happy to hear from you. Okay, I just didn't want to miss that, Melissa,
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you. No, it's great to have that slide up and readily available for everyone to take note. There was a question from Tanis. Are all long-term care homes on a 4-week rotation of the annual menu? I know we are getting into menus more in depth next time we meet, but I'm not sure if you can field that one.
No, that's okay. Menus, a lot of homes are using a 3-week menu cycle. They actually find that there's less repetition. And just, you know, when you're working on a menu, you notice right away you've got, I think, 84 different choices, right? You've got 2 lunches and 2 suppers, 2 lunches and 2 dinners every day, and that adds up to quite a lot of menu items. And it's impossible not to have, you know, there's only so many meats, especially, that you can serve. You know, chicken, beef, pork, fish. I'm sure I'm missing something, lamb. And it's, you know, so there is some repetition, and it is quite hard to avoid repetition. We do our very best to avoid repetition, and we find that a lot of times 3 weeks is actually better than 4 weeks. Things aren't repeated quite as much that way. But then the law is, the regulation is a minimum of 3-week cycle, and also changed up at least once a year. Most homes, I think, do at the end of the year, they do a major revision, and maybe halfway through the year, you know, spring, summer versus fall, winter, they'll do a smaller revision, seasonal changes.
Thank you so much, Dale. I know we are going to be taking a deeper dive into the menus next
Absolutely.
time round. Yes. So if you are registering for the October session, we encourage you to capture any questions that you're keen on us expanding on with your registration. There's an opportunity to, or you can also email a member of the OARC team so that we can share these questions in advance with Amber and Dale so it can be integrated into the discussion.
Yes. That would be good.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a question from Kathleen. How would a more flexible schedule, for example, residents eating when hungry, impact the dietary department? Do you think it would be possible during menu planning to provide an option to allow residents to eat when they felt hungry versus when meal times are scheduled?
It's an interesting concept. It would certainly need a whole review of what those items are going to be. How are we going to keep them hot and fresh? How are we going to know what people want? I think if I was a resident in long-term care, I would always want a piece of salmon, you know? And there are lots of retirement homes, for example, that have menus, and you can order off the menu rather than follow this pattern of, you know, 2 choices and that's it. You know, it's just a different philosophy, I guess. Right now, that's not part of the regulations. I can see it down the road. I can see it with, you know, would you like red or white wine with your supper tonight? You know, all of those things are probably coming eventually, but they're not here right now. But I would love to see that, a system where you're in charge of what you eat, when you eat, but it's not in the works right now.
Thanks, Dale, and great question, Kathleen. Thank you for bringing that up. We're still, I think we still have a few minutes left. We do have some more questions coming in. There was a question from Kayla about that formula that you that I believe you put on the slide for dietary aids.
Yes.
Does it also include hours for the cook? Now, perhaps I could just rewind here for that slide.
Yeah, it includes the cooks and the food service workers. The food service workers include the cooks and the dietary aids.
Okay, so I've just pulled that slide up to refresh your memory.
All of those hours, as Amber stressed, all of those hours go to the long-term care home, not to other services, not to a retirement home, not to a cafeteria, not to catering. They all those hours have to be for long-term care.
Okay. Now there are a few questions, very specific questions about your recommendations about fluid for certain residents of certain weights. So I think if those kind of questions might be best directed via email to Dale and Amber for points of clarification.
Yes.
We had a question. Can you clarify, Dale or Amber, the 30 minutes per resident per month? How does that work with the dietitian?
Yes, so as I tried to explain, the dietitian becomes familiar with the residents and knows where to focus their time and which residents are at highest nutrition risk. So again, somebody on a tube feeding, somebody with a swallowing disorder, somebody with skin breakdown, somebody you know, who's dehydrated, somebody who is just known to not be eating well. That's where the dietitian would put their time and effort in, as opposed to the resident who is very stable, whose weight hasn't changed a lot, who is eating well and independently. That doesn't require a lot of dietitian time. I hope that makes sense to you. I don't know how else to describe it. The dietitian gets a lot of information from the nurses. The dietitian gets information from the nutrition manager. And it's a trick, you know, to come in 2 days a week and keep up with everybody and know how everybody is. It's very different than when you're there on a day-to-day basis and you just follow along with how people are doing. So the dietitian also gets referrals from the nursing department or from any department about, you know, this person needs to be seen due to skin breakdown, not eating well, not drinking well for the past 3 days, you know, constipation that wasn't there before. There's a whole list that the dietitian has. That's a possibility for a nutrition referral to the dietitian that the dietitian has to follow up on. And that's where that 30 minutes per resident per month goes to the residents who require it the most.
Thank you. We have a question about, if you could clarify once again, the main difference between nutrition manager, NM, and the certified nutrition manager responsibilities. Is there a difference?
The nutrition manager and certified nutrition manager are different titles with the same role. So Amber, I'm going to let you take that one.
Yeah, no problem, Dale. And so we do have the same role, but the certified nutrition manager has experience. So being a certified nutrition manager, for example, I'm a certified nutrition manager. I have over 4,000 hours of nutrition management experience to obtain my certified nutrition manager credential. So that is the main difference, is that you need to have a certain number of hours. Now there's a number of seasoned and experienced nutrition managers working in long-term care and all sectors of healthcare that do not have their CNM, but they're experienced and they have a wealth of knowledge.
Thanks,
so hopefully
Amber.
that answers that.
Okay, we've got another question from Jasdeep. As a dietitian often changes or makes changes, they're not always noticed or followed. What do you recommend to improve the flow of communication? So I think this is, a dietitian is making recommendations, but maybe they're not implemented in a timely fashion, like you alluded earlier, Dale, that the beauty is that it could happen right away, but perhaps in this case, it's not always flowing smoothly. Any suggestions there?
Well, that's another reason why communication across the board is so important. So this would go in the residence chart, the residence clinical chart, and it has to go also to the nutrition manager to put certain things in place right away, or the nurses right away if they're getting a nutritional supplement with medications, for example. So I do agree that sometimes these things fall apart along the way, that the communication pathway is not clear, and this is something the inspectors find all the time, that the dietitian has recommended a nutritional supplement and it hasn't been put into place for whatever reason, and those are breaks in communication, and that's not supposed to happen. So we have to do our best to make sure that everybody in the place moves it along so that things get done the way they're supposed to. And it's the same in the reverse too, where the resident is supposed to be getting a supplement, the resident hates the supplement, asks for the supplement to be canceled, nobody tells the dietitian that it was canceled. And so the dietitian believes that supplement is continuing to be served, and in fact it's not. There's a lot of people doing a lot of things 24 hours a day there, and there are things that fall between the cracks, and all we can do is apologize and keep on going. We have to find ways to communicate so well that these things don't happen. There has to be a formula or format in place to make sure that those things don't happen. I know I'm not answering your question, and whoever asked it, I apologize if my answer is frustrating to you, but we have to follow the protocols that are put in place. We have to make sure that everybody gets looked after the way they're supposed to. Just exactly what we would want for ourselves, what any of the staff would want for their family members in long-term care. We have to do the job.
Thank you. So essentially that would be entered in someone's electronic chart.
That's
and
right.
that would be flag that for someone who's maybe coming in for a shift after a few days away, like a dietitian.
Yes, but it also would go directly to the nutrition manager who theoretically is there every day, and they could put that supplement into place right away. So for example, the snacks and supplements are printed on labels very often, and the label is taken off and put onto the supplement with the resident's name and room number and when it should be served. Those might get printed up several days in advance. And so if there's a change partway through that time period, then we have to handwrite those labels to make sure that the person gets it. We can't say, oh, well, we'll do it next time we print the labels. We have to take the time to sit down and write it on the label so that the staff can prepare it so that the resident receives it. So it goes through a number of hands, from the dietitian recommending it to the resident receiving it. It has to go from the dietitian to the nutrition manager, onto the labels, to the dietary staff to make the supplement or make the snack so that the resident, and then goes to the nursing floor so that the PSW can serve it to the resident. It's not just one person. There's a whole line of, it's like the game of telephone, right? Where you whisper something to the next person. It's got to go through all of those people in the same way that it was meant to by the dietitian to get for the resident to receive the right thing.
Thank you. We do have 2 more questions. I know we're kind of at that end of the time mark, but I'm so thrilled that we've got such an engaging topic. There was a question around using the BMI, the body mass index, as a common metric for weight, underweight, overweight, kind of. Is this best practice for determining overweight and underweight? And if so, is there a BMI range for older adults?
We do push the BMI a little bit higher. So 18.5 to 25 would be a normal range for BMI for the general public. For the older person, we do go a little bit higher. 23 maybe rather than 18. 18 is really the bottom end of normal weight. So we do go a little bit higher. We want the resident to have good muscle mass, healthy bones. I can talk about this for a very long time. I just want to say, if you're 20 years old and you stand on a scale and you're 120 pounds, that is your bone mass, your muscle, your fat, and your water. Okay, you can stand on a scale when you're 80 and be 130 pounds, and all of those are different. Your bone mass is different, your muscle mass is different, your fat is different. All of that is different. So the weight and the height are what makes up the BMI. Those are just 2 indicators of health, weight and height. Well, height isn't even an indicator of health because, my 93-year-old mother keeps telling me that she's shrinking. We have to keep hemming her pants because she's much shorter than she used to be, and she's living independently and still driving, but still, she's shrinking. So it's a little bit tricky to use BMI. Sometimes I ask family members, how tall was your mom when you were a kid? And use that measurement to calculate BMI. But I don't know if every dietitian does that. So BMI is definitely part of the process. It's not the only thing we look at. We do skew higher, but there are, because it's such a simple measurement, there's a lot that's left out. So I hope that that's a reasonable explanation.
Thank you. And I did want to end our session with a very honest, real comment from a resident participant. In hearing about kind of how highly regulated the food protocol is, the weights, the food texture, looking at people's continence and the relation to food intake, it might be perceived as a bit invasive. So I'm sure in your roles, it's kind of a balancing act between the rules and the regulations and the numbers versus resident dignity, respect, and quality of life.
We're working as health professionals, right? When I was working as a dietitian in a long-term care home, I talked about constipation half my day. It sounds personal from a resident point of view. It's just business as usual from our point of view. It's part of us as people, right? We have these problems. They're private problems. They're not something you want broadcast throughout, but they shouldn't be hidden and not talked about and not looked after as much as possible. We absolutely keep things confidential. We don't go around talking about residents. It's actually against the law to go around and talk about residents. We shred all kinds of documents so that other people can't see them. If they're not valuable to us anymore, I would take notes when I talk to a resident. I would shred it afterwards, after I have the information. But it's part of being healthcare professional is the personal and private workings of the digestive system, for example, how the kidneys are functioning. To me, it's a series of organs doing their work and slowing down as we age, because all organ systems slow down as we age, and that's just how that works. So, again, we don't broadcast embarrassing things. We're not trying to, say the wrong thing to anybody, but it's part of our job to look at how people are functioning and how their inner workings, how their organ systems are working or not working, and try to, do the best we can to keep everybody going as well as possible and as long as possible.
Thanks so much, Dale. I think that's a great, you've kind of hit the nail on the head by kind of emphasizing that keeping residents informed, like, and the why behind having residents weighed every month, the why there's constant audits happening. It's for quality improvement, it's for quality of life, and
Yes.
everyone within the care team is playing a role to optimize those outcomes. So the more residents know, the more informed and empowered they will feel to ask questions and to engage members of their team. So you've been so generous with your time. We're already 5 minutes after 3 o'clock. And this is a very hot topic, which is exactly why we are dedicating a follow-up webinar. I'm just going to zip back to that slide with our webinar information. And I just wanted to sincerely thank our presenters, Amber and Dale, for your time and sharing your expertise with our audience today. We look forward to having you back in a month's time.
We're looking forward to it also.
Yes.
Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Stay tuned, as we will be emailing you a copy of the recording and the slide deck. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Melissa, you're also doing a survey, is that right?
Yeah, there is a survey for those who participated today that'll be part of that email.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.